Well, again, we have an interesting show today. We are going to have on the show all three candidates that are vying for the Attorney General's spot in the state of New York. So that's going to be very interesting. We'll have them on one after the other so that you can understand who's running, why they're running, what their background is. I'm joined in studio today by Russ Gugino is here with me again, but we have the pleasure today of having the Erie County Republican Chairman Michael Crocker here. So, Mike, thanks for joining us.
Chairman, good to be with you, and I think it's important that we're talking about this office. Obviously, in 26, people are thinking about the governor's race, and that is an important office. But the Attorney General is the top law enforcement officer of New York State, and we have a shameless Attorney General whose entire mission is destroying President Trump. We need a real Attorney General in that office, just like we had when Dennis Vacco, Erie County's own, served in that office. So I think this is going to be an informative program, and I look forward to the discussion with you, my friend.
Yep, we have three excellent individuals that are vying for the office that have put their name in, have gone around the state. The first person that we're going to talk to, DARA, is a Western New York individual. He grew up here in Western New York. He has Western New York roots. He still has a 716 phone number, which I appreciate. But I want to introduce him. So, Khurram, how are you today?
Hey, good morning, Ralph. Good to be with you. Good to be with Mike and Russ as well. I'm doing well. I'm a little bit low in the sleep category right now because, as you know, and I'll go ahead and break the news here on your show. Have been off the campaign trail a bit, took a little bit of a break because, for a good reason, my wife and I welcomed our first child to the world a little over a week ago. We were blessed with a beautiful baby boy, and so wife's doing well, baby's doing well. We're all excited here at the DARA family. Just a little bit low on sleep, and so that's where we're at.
All right, that's fantastic. And you said both are doing well, right?
They're doing great. And, you know, what I'll say at the outset is we're so lucky because both me and my wife, we have so much family in state still. And, you know, that's something that a lot of my friends, unfortunately, that's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
You know, New York is one of those states where you see it all the time. You know, the kids grow up and then the parents move out or vice versa. Somebody gets a new job opportunity somewhere else. And, you know, this is a state that's 49 out of 50 in out-migration, more people leaving than just about any other state in the country. And so when folks think about 2026 and how important it is, these are the stakes. I mean, you know, I'm a new father. We're a young family. We want to raise our family here in New York State, and we want our family to be around so that they can see our kids grow up. And unfortunately, the failed policies that we see coming out of Albany have just made it far too difficult for so many families.
So I want to give people a little bit about your background. So, you know, tell us a little bit about your Western New York background connection, and then, you know, we're going to get into what you've done with your adult life. So let's talk a little bit about Western New York, your connections here.
Well, listen, I consider myself a Western New York native. My parents came to this country. My mom came in the late 70s, my dad in the mid-80s, both originally from Pakistan. They came here for new opportunities. They became U.S. citizens. They got married here, had me, my sister, and my brother. And my dad, who's a retired ER physician, he got his residency at UB, SUNY Buffalo. And so that's where we ended up. We were in Western New York. You know, I grew up, went to public schools, proud graduate of Williamsville North High School. My family's lived in Amherst for well over 30 years. And it was just an incredible privilege for me to grow up in such a great place. You know, my dad was the head of the ER at Sisters Hospital in Buffalo and later chief medical officer at Well Now Urgent Care. My mom, in addition to raising me, my sister and my brother, was extremely active in our community. She was a small business owner. She was president of the Williamsville PTA Council in the early 2000s. In 2022, the New York State Assembly recognized her as a woman of distinction for her community service in Western New York. And so I'm just so fortunate to have grown up the way I did and where I did, where, you know, we had a community that really cherished civic engagement and political engagement. In high school, we had a internship program with our State Senator Mary Lou Rath. And I think Chairman Mike Crocker was also one of those students, along with myself and others who got to intern at that office. And then in 2006, I volunteered on my first congressional campaign, knocking on doors and phone banking for Congressman Tom Reynolds. And so I'm so, so grateful for that kind of upbringing, and those values really led me to law school here in New York City and to private practice, and ultimately to the front lines of some of the biggest regulatory and policy battles that impact New York's economy. And so one thing that I will say at the outset, Amherst was the safest town in America when I was growing up. Like I said, I went to a great public school, got to live in a great community, and you didn't have to be a millionaire. It didn't cost you an arm and a leg to live in Western New York. And unfortunately, for so many of our communities across the state, it's just become far too expensive. The trade-off isn't there, lower quality of life, and people are making the decision to leave. And so I'm running to hopefully turn that around, because the state needs new leadership in Albany.
So you went to Columbia Law School, and tell us a little bit about now your adult life. I know you've worked in public policy, regulatory law. Give people a little bit about that background.
Well, Ralph, you're exactly right. For more than a decade, I've practiced law in New York in the private sector. I've represented companies, worked with companies, advised entrepreneurs, innovators, all who were following the rules, creating jobs in our state, investing in our state, only to be targeted with politically motivated enforcement, regulatory overreach. And so when Letitia James weaponized her office to go after a former president, when she politicized the legal system in this state, it was not surprising to me. I'd seen how lawfare drives business out of this state, raises prices for consumers, raises legal and insurance costs, damages our competitiveness, all while really doing nothing to make our community safer and taking away resources that could go towards public safety. And so from my perspective, as somebody who's been a regulatory and policy attorney, who's advised entrepreneurs, businesses in our state, I've seen the cost of this lawfare, and I believe I know how to fix it so we can turn the state around and make it a safe and affordable state for everyone, not just the biggest companies and the wealthiest individuals in our state.
Well, KHURRAM, I think you hit an important point there. Obviously when we think about the Attorney General's office, we think about public safety, we think about crime, but there's also an important economic position that the Attorney General's office can take. And I think right now we have an Attorney General who's been extraordinarily anti-business, and that has led to rising costs to do business in New York. So I'm hoping you can kind of expand on that. What can the Attorney General's office do, and what do you, as a potential candidate for the office, bring perhaps differently than Letitia James that can help make the business climate in New York State better?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike. And I think what is helpful for folks, I think, is to level set on what is the role of this office? What does the Attorney General do? The Attorney General is not just like being the state's district attorney. We have DAs throughout our counties that handle everyday crime, and we need an AG that supports them, that stands with law enforcement. But the role is much broader. The role is really being the state's chief legal officer. That means advising the state on whether their actions are lawful, representing the state, protecting people in this state, consumer protection. We have new types of organized crime, new types of threats in terms of fraud, targeting our seniors. And so we need somebody who understands these new threats. But what we've seen in recent decades is we've had folks in that office that just make it whatever they want it to be. And that expansion of the office, the way that this office has come to be a major player in national politics, I think is what created the conditions for all of the lawfare that we've seen. And so I'm running to get this office back to its job description of being the state's general counsel, of being the state's chief legal officer. What does that mean? Frankly, it means putting New Yorkers first, not national politics. Right now, this office occupies way too much time focused on being a national political player while abdicating its responsibilities to people in this state. We need an office that is focused on protecting people in the state, prioritizing public safety. I mentioned we have new threats that we face. We need an office that is going to end all of this lawfare against business, making up the rules on the fly, trying to write the law instead of enforcing the law. And I think if we do those things, if we get the office back to its job description, it'll free up resources to not only protect people, but also go through some of these onerous regulations that we have in the state and audit them. Are they lawful? Is this an infringement of the economic rights of people in our state? And so I see this office as having a huge role, not just on public safety, as you mentioned, but also on the economic issues that impact the state. We have a state that is the second worst place to do business, second most regulations, one of the worst economic outlooks, one of the worst tax climates. And I think all of those play into why so many people are leaving this state. And so I think it's time for an AG that comes from the private sector, who understand these problems, who's seen them and who knows how to fix them. You know, New York State has a private sector that I think is one of the best in the country, arguably the best private sector in the country. And our public sector is one of the worst. I think the outcomes, the results coming out of Albany are just terrible. And so I proudly wear, on my resume here that I am a private sector person. I don't come from government. I don't come from politics. And I think that's what we need right now in New York State.
Look, everything you said, I totally agree with. This is an office that is a very broad office, a very broad responsibilities. Consumer protection certainly is one of those very important aspects of this office. Letitia James just isn't there. She's simply using her office for political purposes. And here's a woman who's, arguably committed her own crimes, and yet she's out there trying to prosecute Trump and anybody that's on the other side of the aisle when she herself has serious issues.
I mean, even people in her own party would acknowledge that she's politicized the office. And the area where I think this is actually most concerning, because we all know that playing politics with the law is not a recipe for success in our state. There's so many problems with that. But the more subtle thing that happens is using this office to essentially create one-size-fits-all policies for all of New York State. And remember, New York is a big state. It's almost like 4 or 5 different states put together. As somebody who grew up in Western New York, I really understand that. And what we've seen is this office is used to basically force some very fringe views coming out of New York City often down the throats of the rest of the state. I think it's time that we have people in this office. I think it's time for somebody in this office who's actually lived in Western New York or upstate. It'd be nice to have somebody that has actually drank a Loganberry and knows what a garbage plate is in this office. We need somebody who is not going to forget about our upstate communities, because it's not just that we have parts of the state that are forgotten. I mean, I consider Buffalo to be the heart and soul of New York's culture. I mean, the Bills are New York's team right now. And, that is an area that I'm committed to as Attorney General, making sure that our upstate communities are not forgotten.
Look, KHURRAM, we have a question from Rush Gugino. Go ahead.
KHURRAM, a few years ago, I guess maybe less than that, the state legislature made available $10 million for so-called harassments of people who were being sued by the federal government, and really was Letitia James money. Is that legal to have the state of New York provide $10 million for anyone, and particularly the Attorney General, who may be having lawsuit problems and legal problems with the federal government?
Well, it certainly raises a lot of questions, Russ, because, we should not be having taxpayers footing the bill for Letitia James's personal legal troubles. I mean, it seems like a slow drip of story after story where there seems to be evidence of her, either misusing the office or misusing her position in a way to personally benefit herself. And if that's the case, I mean, no, absolutely not. We should not be having taxpayers foot the bill for her legal defense.
So look, KHURRAM, we only have another less than a minute left. I just want you to, whatever you want to let my audience know, I would appreciate, because you've done an excellent job up to now in informing us as to what needs to be done. But I'll give you some last words.
Well, look, this is a huge race in 2026. The New York AG office has become one of the most powerful offices in the country. It's been, completely politicized. And so I think it is very important that we have a candidate who is a political outsider, who doesn't come into this with political baggage, who has real private sector experience that they can bring to this office. This is an office of 1,500 plus employees, 700 plus attorneys. I've actually worked at organizations of that size. This is an office with a budget of $300 to $400 million. I most recently managed regulatory risk at a $500 million venture fund. This is an office with, a dozen offices across the state. It's not just a New York City specific office. And as I mentioned, as somebody who grew up in Western New York, I know that New York is more than New York City. And so for all of those reasons, I think that I give ourselves the best opportunity in 2026 to take back this office. It's been way too long. Our good friend Dennis Vacco, former Attorney General Dennis Vacco, is the last person who's held this office from the Republican Party, and that election was over 30 years ago at this point, and so it's time for change here in New York.
All right, I appreciate you coming on. We'll have you on again. Thanks. As I said, we are interviewing today 3 candidates for the office of Attorney General. We have in New York State Letitia James, who is probably, in my opinion anyways, the worst Attorney General in this country. She's used the office solely for political purposes. She won her last election by claiming she was going after Trump, and then that is exactly what she did. Now, we have with us right now Michael Henry. So Michael Henry ran this race 4 years ago. He did extremely well. And Mike, you're in this race now. So give us a little bit about your background, about what you feel, but you know the lay of the land, clearly.
Yes, and I just want to correct you. She's not only the worst Attorney General in America, she's the worst Attorney General in the history of this state. I mean, she took all the bad things Schneiderman, Cuomo, and Spitzer did, and basically is doing them on steroids and doing them more recklessly. So, I mean, the reason I'm running again is in 2022, obviously I ran a very close race, 46%. But I continued to stay active. When I was younger, I was in the Federal Society in leadership positions. I'm a constitutionalist. I believe in the rule of law. I've had had the ability to do events with people like Justice Scalia and Justice Alito. And I, quite frankly, never thought I was going to run for office. I worked in the mortgage industry. I was in management, mortgage banking, lived through the whole financial collapse, decided to go back to law school at night, did a part-time program, accelerated, and now I'm currently a commercial litigator for a large firm, about 700 attorneys. I'm of counsel, about 700 attorneys, have about 38 offices nationally. My practice primarily focuses on, civil enforcement of fraud, judgment enforcement, asset recovery, creditor bankruptcy, and I'm also a trustee of a large union pension fund where I oversee the worker side investments as far as the pensions and as far as the health care. That started around $15 million, the fund. Now we're pushing around $21 million. So as the fiduciary, I'm proud of the work we've done there. Son of a police officer from Mount Vernon. My father was a homicide detective, who unfortunately I lost in 2023. And my mother managed a surgery center, so I'm the first in my family to go to college, working class background, and really was never anticipating running for office in 2022. But I just view Letitia James as somebody that, number one, is more vulnerable than people realize. And number two, she does not work in the best interest of the people of the state of New York. She just works in the best interest of a small base of people in the state of New York. And I really want to run to take the weaponization out of the office. And quite frankly, this office has been used for 2 reasons. The first one is to be the next governor, which she clearly failed to do when she tried to run and Hochul steamrolled her. And the second one is many people are using it to weaponize it against political opponents, and we've seen this for decades. And quite frankly, I think it's time we have an attorney general who is an outsider, who understands how to build an infrastructure and restructures the office and does everything they can to take the weaponization and the politics out of this office.
So you own your own practice. So you do sign the front of a paycheck as well as the back. That's an important criteria in my mind.
Right. Yeah, and also when I was in the mortgage industry, I managed a lot of people. I have my own practice. Also, we're of counsel. We're a large national firm, but it's also the responsibility, right? If I have to pay my own E&O insurance. I have to make sure, like yourself, that I'm meeting all the deadlines and doing everything in compliance with the laws and the rules of the court. And if I don't, I'm the one held accountable for that. And on top of that, I think there's something to be said for having to develop talent in that manner, where you're investing your own time and resources into individuals. And that, I think that's a really important thing in these days. And I think you see it now with the president, who's come in as an outsider, right? And he's been able to set up things like Doge and some of these other plans and ideas where he's seeing where waste goes, or where things aren't working in a manner different than people who've just been in the system their whole life.
So, Michael, Happy New Year to you. It's good to hear from you. You've spent a lot of time upstate New York over the last several years, and you know one of the big problems here is affordability and out-migration. When we think of the AG's office, we think of the law enforcement side often, but can you speak a little bit to some of the actions that Letitia James has taken to raise prices on upstate New Yorkers or all New Yorkers, and some things that you as Attorney General might do differently from a consumer protection and pro-business standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. And just bear with me a little bit because I'm a little under the weather if I sound like I'm coughing or my voice is going. So, the misapprehension or the misunderstanding about this office is everyone sees it just primarily as law enforcement, right? That's what people run on. That's what people say. The impact on the economy, as you said, especially what Letitia James has done, is enormous. I don't think I could go into a room in this state where I ask, hey, has anyone had a relative leave this state within the last 3 years, and not have almost everybody raise their hand. And it's simple. Number one, she weaponizes against industries. We saw it with Remington, for example, where she sued them because she's very anti-2A, and then they leave the state, and now hundreds of New Yorkers are out of good-paying jobs. We see it in her targeting of certain people in the financial services industry. I mean, we saw what she did to the president. So she also not only weaponizes her office to pick winners and losers, she's also a radical when it comes to a lot of policies like environmental policy. And I think anybody who travels upstate a lot, just in the last 3 to 4 years, everywhere you turn, there's solar panels that are broken in the winter, covered with ice. There's these wind fans everywhere, destroying property value in the landscape of upstate New York. And energy costs are rising and rising and rising. And what a lot of people don't understand is, if you look on State Line Road on the southern tier, Josh Shapiro is actually giving tax incentives to steal New York energy jobs, where they have New York energy companies crossing the border, working in PA, and then coming back at night. And the problem there is, one, you're losing thousands probably of good-paying jobs, and number two, our energy costs, especially in places like New York City and Buffalo, the big cities, would probably drop about 60% if we developed our own energy here. So my view is different than Letitia James. I view this office as an enforcement office, meaning if someone breaks the law, you prosecute them criminally or you sue them civilly. Where my vision is different than Letitia James is, I believe, just like, and I'm probably the only person since Dennis Vacco, who was the last Attorney General, that felt this way and actually tried to do it and caught flack for it and then turned out to be right. I believe you need bureau chiefs and deputy bureau chiefs, and they all serve at the discretion of the Attorney General throughout the state, who understand the industries they're tasked with overseeing. You should have somebody in the Consumer Affairs Bureau overseeing it who has some kind of private sector background, who understands what a small business goes through. You should have somebody overseeing real estate who has some understanding of how the real estate industry works, not somebody that just thinks every landlord and every homeowner and every building owner is a bad person. And for me, I would go into this office. I would first review as many of the lawsuits as we can of who she's suing, businesses, industries, and see if they're in the best interest of the taxpayer of New York to move forward with them. I would also go agency by agency to make sure that we have people overseeing these agencies as bureau chiefs, deputy bureau chiefs, throughout all the offices, both regional, headquarters, and Albany, that understand the industries they're tasked with overseeing. And then I would make sure that when I hire these people, we are going to make sure that we have a regulatory climate, both on the enforcement side of what they're enforcing, and then also what we're not going to be doing moving forward, that allows small businesses to grow and allows people to be able to keep more of their money in their pocket. And for me, this is a vision. I would not go in the first month and start firing everybody, but I do have a plan, agency by agency, regional office by regional office, to be able to restructure this, because I think the one thing that you brought up that nobody focuses on is the amount of damage this Attorney General does to the economic climate in the state of New York. And we have every resource we need here. If you look through the state, you have the financial epicenter of the world in New York City. You have energy. You have 100 years worth of energy under our feet. You have lakes. You have vineyards. You have international borders. You have international ports. And you have the only football team that plays football in the state of New York, the Buffalo Bills.
That's right.
And I think it's time we start developing here and keeping the money in the state of New York along with our best people.
Tell us the breadth of this office. How many employees? Like you say, there are regional offices. Mm-hmm. She has a number of attorneys that work for the Attorney General. Tell us the breadth of this office.
Right. So, well, the main thing is their civilian staff, which puts it at, over 1,000 people, a couple thousand. But there traditionally was about 650 attorneys in the office, and they served at the discretion of the Attorney General, and they do. You can't remove civilian staff, but you can evaluate any attorney and or bureau deputy bureau chief. She's grown it to over 700, and it's become less efficient, which makes no sense. I mean, actually, if you call there's certain lines that say, we're still under COVID lockdown. I think there was one line, last summer that said, "Welcome to the Office of Attorney General Eric Schneiderman," when we had somebody call there. Wow. So this office has, the main thing is it's nearly 700 attorneys, because they're doing most of the work. Their job is to be responsive. In many instances, they're not. And then there's the regional offices throughout the state. So you have the main office in the financial district downtown New York City. You have an office in Albany. You have an office in Erie that handles most of Western New York. You'll have a Southern Tier office in Binghamton. You have 2 regional offices in Long Island, another one in Westchester, another one in the Hudson, higher up in the Hudson Valley. You'll have one all the way up by Plattsburgh. So there's regional offices throughout this state. So it's also not only important for the next Attorney General to do press conferences and be known in New York City and Albany. It's very important that, for example, you have the best people running your bureaus in your office up in the Buffalo area to make sure that everything is streamlined for the city of Buffalo and the surrounding communities, because these regional offices really have to be run properly. And like one of the things I touched on earlier, I remember when Dennis Vacco was the AG reading about, he really went into restructure what the offices in that part of the state, and he took a lot of flack for it. And then after he failed to get reelected, everybody said he was right. And I think sometimes you have to be willing to do the right thing and risk your reelection. And I think in the long term, running this office properly, streamlining it, making sure that everything is not sent to voicemail also is a big problem in this office. I think that we need to update the IT in this office. We need to update the responsiveness in this office, along with evaluating everybody that works there. And I think that's how we get it to work. And then lastly, you're also the people's lawyer, right? You represent the state of New York when it comes to the Constitution, and you have to defend the state of New York against lawsuits. You have to work on behalf of the state of New York when it comes to lawsuits. And then I think, by the way, something different with me is I would not be proactively trying to fire 3,000 correctional officers. I just want to clarify that,
all right,
Mr. Chairman.
All right,
and then one last thing is...
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. And one last thing, when it comes to the crime, I meant to touch on. When it comes to the crime, the real way you can make a difference is, one, you work in conjunction with local district attorneys and sheriffs, which we actually need, because Tish James doesn't do it with the Republican ones upstate, and that's where most of the drugs are trafficked. Number 2, we want to make sure that we're working in conjunction with federal task force. There's a not-for-profit audit power that you have through the Charities Bureau, which I think is vital, and we're not using the way we should. And then also you have the ability to introduce program bills to the state legislature.
All right, Michael, it's really good having you. All of those are obviously the right issues. We now have another candidate for the Office of Attorney General. This candidate was nominated by President Trump for a federal judgeship. That's the kind of qualifications this lady has. She's got a stellar background. And we're going to bring her on. So, SARITHA Komatireddy. SARITHA, are you there?
Yes, Chairman, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm very appreciative that you're able to be on with us. So, Saritha, tell my audience a little bit about this stellar background you have. You're educated at Harvard University. You graduate cum laude. You have your Juris Doctorate magna cum laude from Harvard Law School. You're a law review. Give us a little bit about that background.
Well, thank you so much. You're very gracious in your introduction. Well, let me start with the most important thing, which is I was born in New York. I was born in Brooklyn. My parents came to this country in the 1980s when President Ronald Reagan was president, and they adored him, so we have been lifelong Republicans. And while we moved around a little bit as I was growing up, I always wanted to come back to New York and make this my home, and that's what I've done. So I went and got an education, as you said, at Harvard College, then at Harvard Law School. After law school, I clerked for Justice Brett Kavanaugh when he was on the D.C. Circuit. And then I set out to be a prosecutor. And that really came from something else that happened in New York, which is 9/11, which happened the first week of college for me. And after that extraordinary tragedy, I felt compelled to do something that would help go after terrorism. And that led me to law school. That led me to wanting to be a terrorism prosecutor. And so I came back and was a federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of New York, which covers Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, and Long Island. But actually our cases cover, in many ways, the whole state. I had victims in Buffalo. I had victims in Rochester. They even cover the whole globe because we go after international criminal organizations. I prosecuted leaders in Al-Qaeda, in ISIS, in the Mexican drug cartels. I prosecuted a couple of Maduro's lieutenants in Venezuela, and I brought some of the first cases against Chinese chemical companies that were sending the chemicals that make up fentanyl to the cartels so that they could make it and send it into our country. And all of that work was really a privilege for me to be able to be part of work that at the end of the day helped protect New Yorkers and protect Americans. That's really why I'm running for Attorney General now. While I was doing all of that, I've seen how the state has gotten less and less safe. What we really need is proper law enforcement in the state of New York, on the streets, in the neighborhoods, all across the state. And we need to put repeat offenders behind bars, not let them out on the street. We need to make sure that drug deaths come down. And the problem is we currently have an Attorney General who's not paying attention to any of that. She's so focused on her own political agenda. She's so focused on being anti-law enforcement that the state is suffering and its people are suffering. We've seen over the last 6 years that crime in New York State is up 26%. Drug deaths are up 63%. I know I can solve that problem. I have the experience and the credibility to solve that problem. And I know I can manage that office. The other thing that I did in addition to being a federal prosecutor is I was chief of staff of the Drug Enforcement Administration, and that gave me an opportunity to support and advocate for law enforcement agents. It also gave me an opportunity to see how a large 10,000-person global organization is run. And so I have that experience to run an office as big as the State Attorney General's office and change it for the better.
Saritha, Michael Crocker here. It's good to be with you, and Happy New Year to you and your family. I heard you mention the word prosecutor a couple times, and you've talked on the campaign trail about being the only prosecutor in this race. Can you speak to the listeners who may not be as familiar with the Office of Attorney General as to why you think that's such a differentiating characteristic for you in your candidacy?
Of course. I think when folks think of the Attorney General's office right now, well, first they think of politics and partisanship because that's what the current Attorney General stands for. And often they think of civil lawsuits, suing in court with civil actions against individuals and businesses. But the reality is, first and foremost, the State Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer of the state. And the State Attorney General can prosecute any crime that a DA can prosecute. They can do that in two ways. One, they can just go in and take over a case or category of cases from DAs if a specific DA is refusing to prosecute them, like is the case, for example, in Manhattan. Or they can send in Assistant Attorney General to help DAs who want to prosecute crime but would appreciate additional resources, like our last Republican Attorney General of New York, Dennis Facco, did. And he made great case law where the New York Court of Appeals upheld that as constitutional under the state constitution and under state law. So there are lots of ways that the Attorney General can actually prosecute crime. You wouldn't know it right now because you don't have a prosecutor as Attorney General. But it's incredibly important because the Attorney General should be focused on what New Yorkers are focused on. And New Yorkers' top concern is crime when it comes to what the Attorney General is about.
I think the two major issues this year are certainly going to be affordability and safety. And so crime certainly is one of the major topics that people in the state of New York are concerned about. And not only have you been a prosecutor, I mean, you've been in that courtroom. You did those trials yourself. You have that background with the stellar educational background. You also worked as an adjunct faculty at Columbia University. You have this diverse background that I think bodes well for someone to take over this job of Attorney General.
Well, thank you, Chairman. And I'm glad you raised that. You're right. It's both affordability and safety. And there's a lot of things that the Attorney General can do that also can help make New York more affordable. Letitia James doesn't do those things. But let me explain what they are. First and foremost, crime actually makes life in New York more expensive. How? Because in a lot of our major cities, we have entire neighborhoods that are off limits, essentially, for investment. You see stores closing down, grocery stores, convenience stores, because they're tired of the burglars. You see people not feeling comfortable living there or walking around there, and folks moving out. So when people talk about, well, we need more housing in the state, that's true. We need more safe neighborhoods in the state so that you can have more housing and you can have more businesses and have more investment. So crime makes life more expensive. And if we bring crime down, that's going to help bring the expenses down. And the other thing is, in the lawsuits, the civil lawsuits that the Attorney General does bring, there's a way to do those. And the problem is, right now, the way that they do it is they make litigation as expensive as possible. When they're going after wrongdoing, they drag the cases out for years. Their focus is on having a press release with a flashy number in the headline, and not on actually helping an individual or a business change, make better policy, not make the same mistakes again, and move on and be productive members of society. And that's a real problem because it's the cost of government that also makes life more expensive. I think finally, we've seen a lot of news in the last few weeks and over the holidays about fraud. We need to be worried about the same kind of fraud here in New York. My last case as a federal prosecutor was a case involving COVID fraud where a woman stole more than $3 million from the PPP program. They called them loans, but actually it was all just free giveaways because all of those loans were forgiven by the Biden administration. And that's not isolated. One of the cases that came across my desk a couple of years ago was a daycare fraud case where there was $68 million involved in a fraudulent scheme with daycares in New York City. I mean, these things happen in New York. I've certainly seen instances of it, and we need an Attorney General who's going to look at it systematically, statewide, and recover the millions, maybe billions of dollars that are going out the door that we could use to actually help our law-abiding, tax-paying citizens.
Hi, this is Russ Gugino. I just wanted to ask you a quick question about the sanctuary city of New York as well as the sanctuary state of New York State. How do you negotiate those two things with a law and order kind of emphasis? Would you feel you might be obstructed in some way by the very law enforcement agencies in New York City and New York State that are pledged to the sanctuary city kind and sanctuary state kind of mentality?
Well, that's something that's got to change, and I think everyone can agree on one thing: we have to get the worst of the worst. We have to make sure that we don't have people who are violent criminals, murderers, rapists in our communities, and we have to be able to work together to do that. Now, when I was on the Joint Terrorism Task Force, I worked with all kinds of agencies: the FBI, Homeland Security, DEA, New York State Police, New York City Police. We all worked together to get terrorists and violent criminals off the streets. And what I saw from that is that collaboration is essential. It helps you focus your resources, prioritize on the worst of the worst, and it also helps you have safe interactions. it's not. When you can safely take custody from one agency to another in a controlled environment, like when someone's walking out of court or walking out of jail, that is a safer way to transfer custody than to force federal agents to go into communities and find someone and conduct a manhunt.